Talk Show. Recorded live.
Hello, everybody. This is William Hayashi talking to you from the Genesis Science Fiction Radio Show, a service of the BlackScienceFictionSociety.com website. This is the June 21st, 2013 edition, and tonight's special guest is Keith Young. Keith, are you a native of Detroit, or is that just where you reside now?
Yeah, I'm a native of Detroit. I was born and raised here.
Yeah, Keith Young is a graphic designer with a number of years of experience, and he's also an educator, former police officer, and Keith, I guess you've just got a roll call of things that you have done. But let's do this. You mentioned that you started out in Detroit. You grew up in Detroit. Whereabouts in Detroit did you grow up?
All over. I've lived on the east side, west side, downtown, uptown. I kind of moved around a lot. So I've been all over Detroit for pretty much all my life.
And did you do high school and elementary school there, or did you go anyplace else, or even did you go someplace else for college, or what happened?
Well, I went to several schools within the Detroit school system. I also went to a couple of suburban schools for a year or two. I graduated from Cass Tech, which is a very prominent school here in the city, and several very famous people came out of Cass Tech. So I'm proud to have graduated from there. I went to the University of Michigan for 2 years, and after that I left and became a freelance graphic designer. I got married very early, right as soon as I left college, and in Detroit, when the automotive industry's bubble burst and a lot of my graphic design work dried up, I still needed to do something because I was newly married. I had 2 infant children, and the police were hiring, and I'm a pretty big, fast, strong guy. You know, I'm like, well, I could be a police officer. I could do that. So that's how I got started with my police career. I was a police officer for about 8 years. I worked in several different precincts in and around Detroit City. I even worked for the Executive Protection Unit for quite a few years. And during that time, I encountered many people in the city, and I had to deal with lots of domestic violence issues, neighbor trouble, and things like that. And what troubled me the most was dealing with youth because they were doing a lot of very ignorant, uneducated type of things and getting in a whole lot of trouble. And as a police officer, we don't have a whole lot of remedies for solving that trouble, so other than locking them up and putting them in the system. And I'm sure as many of you know, that once they get in that system, it's very hard for them to get out. And then when they do come out, they have a very hard road ahead. So I began to think of some things that I can do to help other than locking these kids up. And I decided to go back to my roots as being an educator and a graphic designer and see if I can teach kids how to create things like comic books, animations, and video games as a way of showing them that they have some other options besides crime, being a rapper, being an athlete, you know, those cliches that, you know, unfortunately a lot of our young people cling to as that's what I need to do in order to be successful.
Sure.
And I'm trying to help switch the paradigm from that particular thought process into, well, I got an imagination, I'm creative, let me get into this new creative market where I can, create characters, I can create comic books, I can create things that either can lead me into a lucrative career or a lucrative entrepreneur opportunity. So that's what pretty much led me to the things that I'm doing now.
And when did you start that? About, you know?
Well, I started, my program is called the Creation Station, and it started in approximately 2008, 2009. That's when I decided to leave the police department and start my program. I initially got a grant from Adobe Youth Voices to teach about 200 kids how to use various types of Adobe software like Photoshop and After Effects and Premiere at a nonprofit organization. So, I just kind of went cold turkey. I left my job, and I decided to, become a full-time educator and service provider to nonprofit organizations and educational institutions.
Had you had any experience in, graphic design and things like that prior to going to the police department? I mean, did you do any of that in school?
Oh, yeah. Like I said, when
it sounded like you did design. Yeah, it sounded like you did design for the automotive industry, but I mean, at what level? What kinds of things were you doing?
Oh, no. Okay, so let me back up a little bit. When I was about 16 years old, I had my best friend at the time. His mother was a graphic designer. She was a straight graphic designer. She did things like business cards, letterheads, logos, things like that. And she allowed me to intern for her a couple of summers. I was also going to Cass Tech. They have a really great, or they used to have a really great commercial arts program, and I was a part of that as well. So when I went to college, I went to the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor and I studied the visual arts there. So when I came out, I wasn't working necessarily for the automotive industry per se. I was doing a lot of work with the companies that supported the automotive industry. So places like Sears and Kmart and various tool companies that needed catalogs done. They needed a lot of images scanned. They needed various advertisements to be created, things like that. So I was pretty busy all over the city. I had a unique skill set at the time. There used to be a program that was very popular for desktop publishing called Quark Express.
Yeah, I remember it.
And I was one of the only people in the city that really knew how to work it, besides, people that actually worked in the industry. So I, on a freelance basis, I was able to work just about anywhere I wanted, and the work was plentiful. It was to the point where if I didn't like a job, I could stop that job one day and be working somewhere else the next day, making between $35, $40 an hour. So for a while, it was pretty gravy. But when I mentioned the automotive industry because when the automotive industry went down, also all of the companies that supported that industry, they began to go down, and so a lot of my jobs simply left town.
Sure. And what was it like? I mean, other than the portion of the disaffected youth and things like that, how'd you like being a police officer?
Well, I was able to do a lot of good things. I was able to see a lot of really cool stuff as a police officer. Sometimes I couldn't even believe that I was being paid to do some of the things I was doing. I was literally high speed chasing through the city, running around after criminals, jumping fences. It was like a young man's dream. So I had some very good experiences. I also had some very profound experiences in that they were negative for seeing some of the things that people do to one another and how we treat one another, which is such a big problem. That's really one of the biggest problems in our community, is that the way we treat our neighbors, the way we treat our loved ones and our children has almost completely broken down as far as what I saw on the street as a police officer.
Sure.
And one of the things that one of my sergeants told me, I was talking to him about it, and he was saying, listen, you have to not let this stuff get you down so much and think that this is everyone. He's like, as a police officer, when they send you out on these calls, you're not dealing with the cream of the crop of society. They're sending you to these bad situations. So I had to, kind of work my way through that. And being a police officer is definitely, it can be fun, but it can also be very detrimental to your physical, mental, and spiritual health, and that you do have to deal with so much negativity all day, every day. You sit in the car 8 hours, sometimes 16 hours a day, eating snacks all day. That cliche about,
sure. Yeah.
The cops are going to Dunkin' Donuts and, various liquor stores, gas stations. That's a big part of the job, is going from, store to store, checking to make sure they're not being robbed. Well, while you're in there, you pick up some chips, donuts, pop, that kind of diet every day begins to wear down at your health. So I began to, as a police officer, like I said, I'm not just noticing negative things going on in and around the city, but it started to have a negative impact on me and my personality and my health. And I didn't like it. I just did not like that. I was starting to become a person who I was not, who that I didn't recognize, because unfortunately, in order to be able to deal with negativity day in and day out, you kind of create a shell around yourself. And that shell that you create to protect yourself, sometimes it becomes hard to turn off. And it was just getting to be too much as far as that went. So I decided to make some changes, and it began with changing my mindset about what I was going through and what the people of Detroit were going through, and switching my mindset from what things were going on in a negative manner to, well, what can I do to help fix it? And so that's what kind of helped to guide me away from being a police officer and more into being an educator, to help provide some opportunities, provide some solutions for my people.
And a lot of people who have been either in law enforcement and even in education, especially young education, I have friends who have taught at like kindergarten or first grade level, and they go, after a while, you have a hard time relating to adults on an adult level because your entire, the sphere of what you do and what you have to do professionally is to deal with kids who are very young. And to what you said, you're not called out to go someplace because it's a well-adjusted family having a great dinner and they want you to stop by and eat with them,
Right.
Your situations aren't, they're having a great Christmas party over here and they've got some extra presents. Could you please stop by? So it does, and it also, I would think that it kind of jades you to, that shell is also used to seeing the same kind of thing all the time. And I can imagine that you get into the habit of viewing people always looking at them in a potentially negative or dangerous light, merely because that's the situation that you're put in day after day. How long did it take you to decompress from that after you left the Detroit Police Department?
Well, I actually began to do it before I left, because I had been in some very stressful situations, and it literally shut me down. My back locked up on me. I had to go to the doctor, the chiropractor, various things like that. And something interesting happened. I was talking to one of my coworkers who he's a longtime Detroit police veteran, and he's retired now. But while he was working, he was an entrepreneur. He had a vending machine business. And as I was hatching my idea for the Creation Station, I started talking to him about it. And he said, well, listen, if you're trying to start a business, you want to help people, what you need to do is get your mind right. You need to put on a different mindset about what is an entrepreneur, what is success. And so he began to introduce me to some books. He says, listen, go home and read Think and Grow Rich, and then I get back to you. Come talk to me after you read Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. So I went home and I read Think and Grow Rich, and that had such a profound effect on me, in that a lot of the principles in that book have to do with you making up in your mind that you want to be successful and then taking steps towards doing that. You making up in your mind that you don't want to be around negative people because you actually attract what you're putting out. That was something that I never really considered, that I was actually attracting something that was coming out from me. Mm-hmm. And that began to lead me down an entirely different pathway of a way of thinking that I had not even knew existed. It was almost like Neo from the Matrix. You start seeing things that you didn't know were there. You start feeling things, and so that actually helped to start decompress me from all of the negativity and all of the things that I felt were going on, and I began to change my attitude right then and there on the spot. And literally overnight, my situation began to change. You know, my coworkers who had been treating me poorly, some of my supervisors and things like that, almost overnight began, because I made a change, they began to change their behavior towards me. Mm-hmm. And I was like, wow, there's something to this. This is great. And that became something I also wanted to impart to, you know, the people that I teach as well, that, you know, if you're trying to be successful, if you're trying to create a business or you're trying to write a book, a comic book or whatever, there is actually a whole body of knowledge that you should really be getting into that's going to assist you with that. You know, if you're always complaining about something is wrong with this or something is not right with that, then you're actually going to attract more of what you think is so bad. So that's kind of how I was able to switch my mindset from being a police officer to doing what I do now. And actually my circumstance changed before I was a police officer, and that's how I was able to get, you know, the grant that I got for the amount that I was able to get it. They gave me over $35,000 plus $10,000 worth of software the first time I ever wrote a grant to do my program. Now, you know, I don't know if other people do that, but that was pretty amazing to me.
Oh, it is.
So
it is.
And it was as a direct result of what my mentor shared with me and me changing my mindset, you know, actually doing the work. You know, it's one thing that to read what to do and how to do it. It's something else entirely to apply it and, you know, see if it works. So I can definitely say that it works. If you do it, it works.
Why don't you do this? If for people who are sitting in front of their computer, you can take a look at Keith's website, at least one of them. We'll talk about as many as we can here. Well, we'll get them all. It's the Creation Station CS, no www, the Creation Station CS.com. And there's a link here that goes right to the Media Arts. Should they go to the Media Arts or just check out the homepage of your site, Keith?
They can start at the Media Arts and just kind of explore around from there, see what I have to offer and what my youth programs are all about.
Okay, it's the Creation Station CS, all one word, .com/media-arts, and go take a look at that. I popped the link up in the chat room for those of you who are logged in online. You want to tell us a little bit about your site?
Well, basically the site that I have up that you put up for me is a site about my training program.
Okay.
That I do for both youth and adults. Right now I'm focusing primarily on youth, and that, like I said in the beginning, I teach them how to be creative with computers.
Okay.
And I'm trying to get them into some of the careers that we're not traditionally well represented in. I want to get us more into being animators, into being the creators of the special effects and things like movies, sci-fi movies, fantasy movies, all the things that Black Science Fiction Radio is all about.
Right.
We need more representation in those areas. And we need to be the ones in control of creating those images. So I'm trying to bridge the gap between a young person's imagination and the skills and dedication that they need to get them where they need to be as far as being able to do those things competently. It's one thing to have a desire to, you know, want to participate in the digital media arts, but it's something that does take some time and effort. And it takes a certain amount of skill and craftsmanship. And those things, you know, don't happen overnight. And you definitely need to know what to do and how to do it in order to take advantage of the opportunity.
Right.
The problem that I saw in my community, in urban inner city schools, they don't teach the arts anymore. That was the first thing to go. When the budget gets cut, the arts is the first thing to go. They never really taught computers. And they definitely didn't teach it on the level of, you know, let's do some animation today, kids. You know,
sure.
Let's create a magazine today. Let's create a book. They never did it at that level in my neighborhood. And so I'm trying to introduce that into the school system. I'm trying to introduce that to our children so that they are actually really and truly empowered to take part in this explosion, the digital revolution. It's like we're still lagging behind the entire desktop revolution.
Are you doing this? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. What was your question?
Are you doing this in like the public school system in Detroit? Do you do this in seminars, or do you do community outreach? How are you going ahead and doing this kind of outreach?
Well, I've been partnering with a couple of schools here in Detroit. One is called Base Academy, and another is called Schultz Academy. And I'm slated to begin working with their students this fall coming up. I started my program working with nonprofit organizations who have roots in the neighborhood, and they would bring in the youth from their particular neighborhoods and allow them to participate in the program. So I try to reach out to places that have viable computer labs where I can, introduce them to the techniques that I have to show them. And so a big thing, one of the problems with my first program is that even though I was blessed to get the grant from Adobe and lots of their software, they gave me like the Adobe Master Suite CS4, like the latest versions of everything. However, the big problem with that was that the students couldn't go home and perform with that software because they couldn't afford it. Some of the students didn't even have a computer at home.
Right.
So that was a big hurdle in that, I'm telling them about all this great stuff, but then they can't go home and experiment with it. They can't go home and play with it. So something great happened not too long after I started my program was this entire open source explosion. If you don't know what open source is, or for those who don't know what open source software is community-developed software that's very similar to commercial products. So for Photoshop, there is an open source alternative called GIMP, and it is free. Everybody can download it. You can download it for your PC, you can download it for your Mac, you can download it for Linux, and it's completely free, and it has very similar functionality to Photoshop. So a lot of different types of software like that began to flood the internet, and so now I'm able to show kids the techniques, and they can go home and practice the techniques and keep it up. So that was something that it really helped me to progress with my program.
Sure. One of the things, we've done a similar program here on the west side of Chicago. Me and a few tech volunteers, we went and helped design and build a school, or at least the computing part of the school, including the lab and the networking and everything. But we were lucky enough to be able to partner with one of these liquidators that gets, let's say a law firm has 150 computers that they want to upgrade. They give the old 150 to this liquidator, and more often than not, they don't even get any money for it. And then the liquidator was nice enough to donate out computers for two levels. One was to help outfit the school. The others were for us to kind of clean up and make them available for the students, which seems like the only component that you guys are missing up there. Have you thought of partnering with somebody up there to try to get hardware into those kids' homes?
We have. I've worked with a couple of programs, actually. One of them was called Connect Your Community, where that was the goal. We offered basic computer training, and at the end of the program, we helped them to get some software. Grants that I've been writing lately, I try to write in a refurbished laptop or a refurbished desktop system so that, once again, it's twofold. One is I'm trying to really help get some computers into these kids' homes.
Right.
And two, it's a carrot to say that, listen, if you pay attention, if you do the lessons, and you're applying yourself, then your reward is going to be that you're going to get a computer at the end of the program. So, that kind of helps as well because students in this day and age have a very, very short attention span. So I have to use as many ways to keep their attention as possible.
Sure.
And so that works pretty well. And so far I've been able to do that for a couple of my programs, write that in as a grant. And I do have a couple of partners that I use to help me out with getting some refurbished laptops. But I'm always, looking for more resources to reach out to others to really help me to get some, get computers into the homes, because a big part of our problem, once again, is there's something called the digital divide that's going on, and that in African American or not colored people, but people of color's homes, we don't have the same access to a computer and to internet. We just don't. The biggest thing we have now, which is actually, once again, something that's I see colored in the chat room. The biggest thing that's coming online now that's actually helping with that is everybody has a smartphone now.
Yes.
And so we're trying to teach our students how to tether their smartphone to their computer so that it can act as their internet for their home. So I've been real busy trying to come up with some solutions for not just teaching the hard, teaching some skills, but also getting the students some hardware so that they can really take advantage of it.
Well, let's talk after the show, because I may be able to direct you to some of these people who would do just that. And sending computers from Chicago to Detroit piecemeal would be a pain in the butt, but if somebody sends a van or something like that, then you get them all at one time. So we'll talk about that later. But that is the hardest part. It's the part that we're facing too, and a lot of these parents realize that in order for their kids to compete on an even level, if outsiders and volunteers like you go into the schools and help out, they're going to have to be able to provide that kind of computing environment in the home so that those skills can be nurtured, can be reinforced, and can grow. You want to talk a little bit about the specifics of the program? How many kids have you put through the program? How many kids do you usually touch in a year's time? And I don't mean that in the bad way. And what kind and what? Well, you know what I mean. People take everything wrong. But I mean, what is your? How many people do you think you want to be able to elevate to a much more competitive, educationally competitive rate in a year's time? Because it sounds like you're really going gangbusters with your program.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I've taught or had through my program about 300 students.
Okay.
I've been since my last program that I was working with. I had to take a bit of a hiatus because I wasn't able to find grants in a timely manner. So I had to partner with a grant writer, and then I had to find 2 new nonprofit partners. So that took me a little bit of time, but I'm back up and running, and I have a summer program that I'll be running approximately 20 to 30 students through, and in the fall I'm going to be back in 2 different schools, and those schools, it looks like I'll have between 100 and 150 students that will be run or going through the programs during the next school year.
Man, that's great. I mean that's a good number of people. And then do you see your program growing, over time to where you're actually able to do more than the handful of schools that you do now?
Yes, I've actually been talking to a few people about creating almost a franchise type of thing where I have a curriculum book and I have a DVD that people can purchase for their school or their educational institution or their nonprofit organization, and they can use the resources that I have available to teach their students the curriculum. I can kind of do a train-the-trainer type of thing where, the person who usually, every nonprofit has someone that's running the computer lab already.
Right.
So I can kind of go in and train that person and show them all the different types of open source software, show them the exercises that the kids can go through, and then let them have at it. So that's my expansion plan, is to really push out my curriculum and, just share these opportunities with people in as many places as possible.
That's great. You're listening to Genesis Science Fiction Radio, a service of the BlackScienceFictionSociety.com website. This is the June 21st edition, 2013, and we're talking to Keith Young, a former Detroit police officer who has turned educator up there. Let me ask you this. Since you're going to quantify this and turn it into a legitimate course, how do you feel about rolling out this course, across the country in disadvantaged neighborhoods, like the west side of Chicago where I work? Obviously there are all kinds of cities in the south and the west and the east where this sort of program would be great, especially when you look at the fact that you're using open source software, maybe even open source operating systems, which really brings down the cost of putting together a computer lab or even a single computer. Do you see yourself trying to branch out, nationwide with this program of yours? I think it would be natural.
I do. I just need some strategic partners, and I need the resources to do it. But yeah, that's my ultimate goal, is to go nationwide. I really would like to go to Africa and Mexico and South America as well, to really get this stuff out there to places where, once again, we're not represented very well because we don't have as much access to the resources.
Sure.
So I'm trying to get out there as far and as fast as possible. But realistically, what I've been doing is I've had to spend some time building up my framework, my administration. It took a lot of time for me to actually create that book and a DVD. I do video tutorials online. Those things take time, but the good thing is that I'm actually I have a lot of those things done now. My book is done, the DVD is done. I have the website. I did all those things myself. So now that those things are done, I'm kind of ready to actually get out and tell people about it and share what I have to the people that I've been wanting to serve so much.
Right, and then the other part of this is we're at the point now where cloud educating, cloud computing, are far more practical, lower cost, and a much easier way to give people access to your curriculum, to the software, to the concepts, and even for group learning. I mean, when you think about the fact that you could be in Detroit and teaching a class essentially that's going worldwide at any given moment, there are definitely advantages that today's technology give you in terms of what your scope can be. And it sounds like, you're always, or at least constantly, looking at how the technology can be leveraged to benefit the programs, and at the same time give the people you're educating a good idea of what the capabilities are.
Yeah, that's the goal, and once again, the technology is really helping me out, because that was a large hurdle for me when I first started. I'm like, man, I don't know what I'm going to do. These kids, they can't have the software in their home, and now, as soon as I said that and I identified that as a problem, people kept coming to me and say, hey, have you heard about GIMP? Have you heard about Blender? Do you know it's free 3D modeling and animation? Have you heard?
Sure.
And I started like, wow, okay, this is actually viable. At first I was a little shy about the open source, because I'm like, well, if they're not learning the commercial tools, they may not be as viable in a commercial environment. But the software, open source software, began to take such leaps and bounds that it positioned itself to the point where if I can teach the kids the principles, if I can teach them, the basic concepts behind how all these things work together, then they can very easily take those skills and parlay them over to commercial software.
Well, feature-wise, it's very competitive. In most cases, the identical features are there, And as you said, once kids know the concept, first of all, they have a lot less fear than we do. If they get into a piece of software, they're not afraid to try something new. They're not afraid to, point, click, and do stuff, 3 or 4 things by the time we're trying to teach them to do one thing. So the use of open source software now has lost a lot of the negative connotations, the negative aspect, the negative vibe around it, because the open source community has realized, well, let's just take one example. You've got OpenOffice.org, which is a Microsoft Office compatible suite, and there are no features in Microsoft Office that are missing in the OpenOffice product. As a matter of fact, the OpenOffice product has some very nice features that you don't find in the Microsoft product. And as long as you can teach kids conceptually what the goal is, they'll use whatever tool they have available, and they'll pick it up a lot faster than we will.
For sure. My son is a great example. I have a 15-year-old son, and I taught him how to use a program called Lightwave. Now, that's a commercial bit of 3D modeling and animation software. And I was showing him how to look online and find different resources and tutorials. And one day he comes to me and says, "Hey, Dad, I found these great Blender tutorials. This guy is telling you how to make an entire character from start to finish in Blender." And so I'm like, okay, well, I'm not really that much into Blender. I like Lightwave, so you're going to have to teach that to yourself. And my son literally taught himself how to create his own characters and rigs inside of Blender by watching some open source free tutorials on YouTube.
Meanwhile, saying to himself, I don't have to worry about that old fuddy-duddy who doesn't want to try this new thing.
Absolutely. He got me into Blender. Once he showed me how many cool things that he can do, I'm like, wow, this actually is really great. So it really matches up with what you're saying in that the kids are not afraid of it. They're not afraid to learn something new. They're not afraid to go down a new pathway and see what works. And, they are actually, once they have a clear concept of what the goal is and how to make it happen, it's like you just let them go, and then they'll take care of the rest. So that's what I really like to see in my students when they take some initiative and want to learn this stuff. They actually shoot right past me and my skill level. And that's what I want. That's what I'm hoping for. That I'm like, we can't do this alone. We can't do this. My way of thinking is not as fast as the young people now. They're able to think. They're able to multitask and do things at a completely different level than I can. So I'm actually banking on that.
And they communicate between each other a lot better than we do. I mean, when one of them finds something out, they all learn about it about 15 minutes later. They definitely share information amongst each other a lot better than we did, and they're very fast about doing it. So that's an awesome thing that we're able to plug into, and I'm trying to plug more of them into it. The idea is that I'm trying to create a paradigm shift amongst our people. Right now, African Americans are the largest consumers of everything, particularly media. Entertainment, video games, movies, things like that. We eat these things, literally. We spend about 57 hours, according to Nielsen ratings, sitting in front of the television or some form of entertainment. That's a full-time job and 17 hours of overtime. That's ridiculous. That's a ridiculous amount of time that we spend watching something someone else created, buying a game and playing something else that someone else created. I'm trying to get us to switch from that paradigm into being a creator, spending just a little bit of time learning how to code, learning how to animate, learning the fundamentals of writing a story, creative writing. Let's spend some more time being creative so that not only can we create more opportunities for us in the entertainment and media industry, but we can also create more economic opportunities for ourselves. Because little do they tell you,
besides being a rapper, besides being an entertainer, besides being an athlete, some of the richest people in the world is the creative class, the artists, the animators, the writers. You know,
right.
There's story after story of, writers who have not only become best-selling authors of books, but those books then get picked up as movies, cartoons, video games. We need to be taking advantage of that. I know that we have the same amount of imagination, the same amount of creativity, but where we're being left out is the practical application of the arts, and we need to get back to that. So ideally, that's what that's my goal, and what I'm doing, and I'm just going to keep chopping away at it until I make something happen.
Have you thought about maybe monetizing, your idea, and not in a bad way, but maybe putting together a programming house, a production house, where some of these kids can, at the upper levels, can actually be working on commercial products. Maybe you can start doing animating for people, or graphics, all of the different things that you're able to do. And then maybe put together a I don't want to say, a software house where you can actually help these kids get started. Because once they have a job and they make money, getting a job elsewhere is 100 times easier than trying to go out with a blank resume.
Yeah, that's true, and I'm working towards that goal as well. To once the students go through and get some training, that we can begin to produce these things for others.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's a goal that I am working towards. The grant that I have for the summer, it's actually for the entire year. I was recently awarded a grant from the Black Male Engagement, which works with the Knight Foundation.
Okay.
To teach 20 to 30 students how to create a basic video game. At the end of the project, we're going to have one finished video game. I plan to have at least 20 or 30 finished video games for the students, but one finished video game that we work on collectively, that they can sell, or that they can, it'll be playable on Macs and PCs, and so that's like the beginning of that particular idea that speaks to what you were just saying, and that's what ideally I would like to do more of that, where I'm teaching them the skills, and then we're going to take those skills and have a finished product. And, in the future, I do hope to have my own group of students that I've taught how to do graphic design, web design, coding, so that we're making apps, we're making websites, we're doing animations, for commercials and things like that as a service for, people in the community. That is a part of the goal as well.
And giving them 21st century skills that they would not get otherwise. I mean, even your standard, obviously your standard public schools, they're short on money. Everybody's crying, poor, and I don't mean that in a bad way, like they're whining, but I mean, one of my beefs is that one of the biggest fictions that we have in this country is that we're somehow, devoted to educating our kids. And yet when you tell them, well, we're going to have to boost your taxes by 1 or 2% so that we could help the schools out, I mean, you've never heard such caterwauling in your whole life. And, well, I'm serious. But putting together the kind of enterprise that you're putting together, being able to pay kids, you don't have to pay them a huge wage, but get them started. I mean, this sounds great, Keith. I mean, I really admire what your goal is in trying to uplift an entire community out of that digital divide. I mean, the digital divide, we've been talking about that since about 1990, and that was, prior to the huge eruption in the internet. But like you said, handheld devices are now equalizing access to digital content, but they don't do much for the educational part, which is where you're coming in and doing something great. if you're going to be looking to hire people to do these sorts of things, to learn these skills and stuff like that, I'll be sending you my resume later if you work with seniors. So we'll talk.
Okay.
I noticed here you also are more than just a history buff. It appears, from some of the things that I've read, some of the things that you and I talked about online, that history and the real history, corrected history is something that is more than just a hobby with you. You want to talk about that a little bit and where that grew out of?
Yes, I would love to. My beginning with my affair with history and how its life-changing effects began with, it was something internal. Around the same time that I was beginning to change my mindset about being a police officer and getting into education, I began to have this very strong urge to learn more about Africa, to learn more about my people, my background. I got this real strong urge to do a family tree and find my people, how we migrated from the South to Michigan. It was like a call almost. I can't really explain it any other way. And so I was talking to a friend of mine about that, and she had some videotapes by a historian, a doctor named Dr. Charles Finch. And she was like, well, check out this video. I think you'll like it. It's about history. And so when I watched his video, which he was at a conference, and he was supposed to be talking about the medical industry. But he starts talking about African history. And he goes down this litany of things that Africans created, the mathematics that we pioneered, the various innovations in architecture and the liberal arts, and all these things were like, I was like, what? What did he just say?
Sure.
And he said, well, at the end, he said, you may wonder why I'm talking about history. I'm a medical doctor. What does all this history have to do with anything medical? He said, well, as a medical doctor, the first thing you have to do before you diagnose someone's problem is you have to take a history. And by taking a history or by providing a history for someone, you're able to help to cure what's wrong with them. That completely changed my entire, was a major shift in my entire life. Because not only did he share the information that he shared, but he also shared several resources, several other authors and scholars that I could look up and look into to find out more about what he was talking about. Because I had never been taught these things in school. I never heard these things before.
Right.
So he gave out some authors like Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, Dr. John Henrik Clark, Dr. Joseph Ben Yakinen. And upon reading their work, because of course the first thing I did was go to the bookstore. They don't have it. I found out they don't have those books at regular bookstores.
Right.
I had to go to a place here in Detroit, actually Highland Park proper. It's called Nandi's Knowledge Cafe. It's an African-American bookstore and cafe, and she had all these books there. And so, I just kind of went crazy and bought, a stack of their books and start pouring through this history that I never knew existed about Africans and how Africans were in America prior to Columbus, how there were Africans in America right along with who we now call Native Americans, that there were people in South America and Mexico called the Olmec.
Right.
All of the great Nile Valley contributions to culture and civilization that was provided by through a book by Anthony T. Browder. So I just began to discover all these things. Now, something else began to happen. Because I had been a lifelong student of art and symbols, I began to see some very interesting things happening with the symbols, in that a lot of the things that I thought, that they showed in the media belonged to someone else. They showed me Superman. Superman, as a young man, that was my favorite movie ever. One of my favorite superhero characters. But I found out that Superman really is based on the principles of an African hero named Haru, or more modernly known in Greek time, or after the Greek times, as Horus. And all of the symbols on him are represented by Haru. Now, Haru is an Egyptian or Kemetic. We call them deities or gods now, but they were actually called neters, which are the more like forces of nature, of the sky and of the sun. And so I began to use my symbolic lens to look at these things. So if we look at Superman, he wears blue. That's his primary color. Well, the sky is blue. And then he has this inverted pyramid on his chest with an S in it. And if anybody's ever seen any of those old exhibits of King Tut or any pictures of ancient pharaohs or queens, you'll see that they have something on their forehead called a uraeus, which is a serpent, and it's shaped like an S. Now that uraeus, symbolically it stands for power, protection, and wisdom. So Superman having that S on his chest, the real reason why the bullets bounce off is because he has that S, which is in the shape of the uraeus, which means power and protection. All right, so I began to see things from a completely different perspective that I didn't have before, because now I have a history, because I began to study and feed myself these things, and then I began to see how a big portion that of our history, and when I say our history, I'm talking about African Americans right at this point, a big portion of our history was actually destroyed when they got to when colonialist powers and various European powers would come upon our shores. The first thing they would do is say, "Show me your books, show me your records," and then they would take them and they would either burn them or they would hide them away, in some secret vault somewhere. And then they say, "You can't write like you write anymore." Now, our people were very well known for pictographic writing in pictures. Mm-hmm. All right? There's a saying that a picture is worth 1,000 words. All right? So our people, genetically, there's something about our people that pictures speak very profoundly to us. And that language was robbed from us. And we were told, you can't write like that anymore. Matter of fact, for a long time, you can't even write. We don't even want you reading. And during that time where we were unable to write, we were unable to read, under the pain of slavery, a lot of books were written, a lot of history books, a lot of rewriting of history, a lot of things were happening. And then by the time we could begin to read, by the time we could begin to write, there's an entirely new set of knowledge that says we were slaves. We're the children of slaves, and we deserve to be slaves, as opposed to all of the great history that belongs to us as a people, all of the great symbols and symbology that get used in movies every day, get used in comic books every day. I see them in science fiction movies. I see our themes, our motifs that we don't think belong to us anymore. I go in some of the forums and, here's people talk about fantasy, and fantasy doesn't belong to African people. That's not something that we created. Should we even call our writing fantasy? What do we have as far as fairies and mermaids and werewolves and vampires? And the problem is that they don't know that all of those things have an African origin. All of them. Fairies, witches, everything that we consider to be fantastical, even things that we consider to be science fictional. I found in my studies that even the movie Star Wars is based it's almost ripped wholesale from The Passion of Osiris, which is a story about Osiris or Osar, who was another Kemetic deity there was an entire dramatic play that played itself out, and it played itself out for thousands and thousands of years. And so really when they're saying a long time ago, far, far away, it's like they're talking about Africa, really, but they made it into something science fictional, and we love it. We eat it up. And little do we know that these stories belong to us, that, this is a part of our heritage that has been recolored, if you will, and presented as something and someone else.
Yeah, that's true. And the fact of the matter is, I mean, if we were to be entirely honest, what's that phrase, everything old is new again, or there are no new stories, only just new ways of telling them. There's all kinds of cliches about that, but it is actually true. I mean, you try to think about, when someone sits down and goes, I want to write something that's completely new, what I want to do is I want to say, here, I'm going to give you a sedative. Are you a drinking person? Let me get you something to drink, because I hate to break it to you, but, all you can do is just put a new spin on an old story, because a lot of these stories have already been done. I mean, almost all of them have already been done, which is one of the reasons why science fiction works the imagination the way it does, because what it does is it can take a familiar story, even a historical story, and by applying a completely new creative universe around it, it makes that storyline brand new and also makes it accessible to common culture.
Yes, no doubt. And the thing about that is that I really would like to see more of our creative minds using those motifs, because a lot of times I run into writers and artists who have great ideas for science fiction or great ideas for fantasy, but they don't use any of the pre-existing symbols. They don't use any of the pre-existing mythology or archetypes. And that's a problem, because it's like they're robbing themselves of a vital vocabulary, such a rich tapestry of things that have come before and can be used or pressed into service for telling their story in a way that is relatable, in a way that's not just entertaining, but so that it also has some depth, that it can also speak on multiple levels. Because our storytellers, our griots, were masters at creating esoteric stories. An esoteric story, or the word esoteric, simply means that there's a dual meaning, that there's something on the inside, that there's something that you need special knowledge to figure out. Those are the most interesting stories, because you have a layer on the outside of the story that, the lay person or, just somebody regular would look at it and say, oh, that was a good story. I really liked it. They may not even know why they really liked it, but they know that there was something about that story that was profound. Mm-hmm. But once you get into it, somebody can say, well, did you know that the symbol that he used actually means, it has an astrological meaning, or it actually has a geological or a biological meaning? Did you know that when they're talking about the 12, they keep saying 12 this and 12 that, they're talking about 12 constellations. And those constellations have special relationships to each other. And so, when you begin to break things down like that, that adds a whole new layer of depth to your story. And, people know that you were actually being more intentional about your creation. You weren't just slapping something together. You weren't just slapping together some dialogue and putting people into situations, but that you're actually being intentional about communicating a message on various levels, on multiple dimensions. And because we're multidimensional people, it's important that we learn how to tell multidimensional stories. And our myths, our archetypes, our folklore is full of those things that are just ready to be mined, if you will. You can take and pick and choose as you will the stories that, once again, there's nothing new under the sun. The most profound movies you've ever seen, if you tell me I really love The Matrix, I'll tell you how there's an African analog. You tell me I really love Star Wars, that's an African story. I really loved, there's so many stories I can tell you where they came from. I can tell you the history. I can tell you which symbols that they picked and why they picked them and what they were trying to communicate to you. That's very important.
Yeah, and it makes perfect sense too, because if you want to get entirely scientific about the whole thing, the first modern peoples came from the African continent. Mm-hmm. So of course the first mythologies came from the first peoples, and those mm-hmm. first mythologies were created out of I don't want to say they weren't created out of whole cloth. They were created out of the existing physical environment that was present at the time. And so you have these progenitors of all the mythos that the world has encompassed. You've got Greek, you've got Roman, you've got Native American, you have Inuit, you have all of these different mythos, and then you have the entirely rapacious constructs like some of these current religions, and I'm going to get mail for that, I'm sure. But the first stories came from the African people, because the first people, the first progenitors of the storytellers originated on that continent. So, of course, that makes sense. It offends probably European sensibilities, but, excuse me, it is what it is. And to what you said earlier about an entire group, of Europeans who believe their manifest destiny gave them the right to not only sever the colored peoples that they enslaved from their heritages and from their families and from their communities, but they had a well-known, very, very important reason for keeping those people from discovering their roots, because there is strength in community. In our country, probably at the turn of the last century, the biggest influence in the black migration north was a single newspaper, was the Chicago Defender. And that newspaper was sneaked across the country by black railroad employees and thrown out at railroad crossings where people could pick up copies. And there were, and this was a way to at least help them assimilate. But the part that was missing was getting, these blacks back into understanding their mythos, their stories, their heritage, their combined culture. And that's something that it appears that you are very focused on trying to return to our people. Well, half of my people.
Most definitely.
How does that affect your art?
Well, it affects my art on many levels, in that it helps me to be a more informed designer. Basically, because I am symbol literate, I am aware of the power of images, not just on a mundane level, but also on a more spiritual level, if you will. I'm aware of what these things mean.
Sure.
And so I'm able to incorporate them into my artwork, and with the intention of using them just as purposefully as someone else that may be using them with a more sinister purpose, or with the purpose of misleading, or taking credit for something that doesn't necessarily belong to them. And that's not to say that everyone, that's not African American or a person of color has a sinister motive, because the great thing about the myths and mythology that I'm talking about is our people were such geniuses to the point that, for one, many of the monuments, many of the temples and things, the pyramids that were built by our people, cannot be duplicated to this day. And they contain such mathematical and astronomical precision that the scientists, mathematicians, and everyone in between are at a loss to figure out how those people were able to do those things.
Yeah, they still have no idea how the pyramids were constructed. There was just a recent article about the arguments about how they moved the Easter Island heads and all of these things. And these are not inconsiderable engineering feats that were done by the non-white peoples around the world. It took a non-white to invent the number 0. Imagine where we would be without the number 0. I mean, you can't have a computer without a 0. I mean, these are some pretty deep, significant thoughts, concepts, ideas that have been, well, I mean, I don't want to really get down on anybody about why people believe that only certain people can invent things, but I think that it's very laudable what you're doing in trying to return or at least reacquaint people with a very important heritage that has global and mega historic implications.
Yeah. Well, just on it works on so many levels. All right. So for me, it really helped me to make some changes in my life and realize what's going on around me. But also, I just, for the purposes, of Genesis Science Fiction Radio, I realized that once again, these stories are so rich. This heritage is so full of everything that we think is fantastic and awesome. And it hurts me that I don't see more of us using it. I don't, it's ours. It belongs to us. We should be the ones who are putting it in front of people, showing it off, highlighting these things because it can make the stories that we come up with so much richer. I'm so fed up with seeing what the media pushes in front of us, or the ones of us who are able to break free. If I see another black man in a dress, I want to hurt somebody. I don't want to see that anymore. We can be more than minstrels. We can be, we can be so much more, and we can portray ourselves as so much more, because the history is there. The tapestry has already been made, and it's there. It's almost like a buffet. We can go in and pick, a little bit of symbology, a little bit of astrology, a little bit of, the occult. You want to make your stories rich. Use some of the stuff that has come before you. Everyone else does. I promise you. Thor is nothing but Haru, warmed over again. That's. Once again, like you said, I'm not trying to offend anyone, but Thor, Hercules, those are our characters.
Sure.
They used to look like us. Now they don't. But if you want to take it back, if you want to go back further than Hercules, Haru, which we're really talking about Greece and Rome, then you're talking about Haru. So if you want to get right down to it, let's start talking about, well, what the heck did he do? What was so special about Haru? He did so many things, and we've seen his story so many times in the movies. The young man who has to learn how to come to grips with his power. He learns that the world isn't what it seems. And he has a bit of a temper problem. He has a bit of an anger issue that he has to master himself. He has to master his fear. He has to master the skills that he has in order to do something, in order to save his people, redeem his father, and make his mother happy. I mean, that story is so chock full of things that people have just taken little bitty bits of and made entire movies, made entire series out of, made entire book series out of. Our stories. They belong to us. We should be learning them and using them.
Well, I'm about to make everybody get mad now because let's take my crowning example. As far as we can tell in today's common culture, Jesus was a white guy. Now, how the heck does that happen? I'm serious. I mean, here's a man who wandered around, that area of the Mediterranean all his life, was born of Jewish parents and a woman who really stuck to her story, and he's supposed to be supposed to be some blonde, blue-eyed, translucent white character hanging from a cross, and that's one of probably the most famous examples that I can point out where the mythology and the symbiology of original African stories had been completely taken, subverted, whitewashed in both senses of the word, and turned into something that he completely was not. And it's not something to get angry about anymore. It's just what it is it's sad that this is something that is so important to a vanishing, what used to be a very, very powerful majority on this earth, and now they are being outbred. And well, let's get away from that. Let's just talk about the fact that it's still very hard in this country to get, the accurate tellings of the story, the basis of the story, the origins of many of these myths and mythos, and even the origins of some of these very, very basic stories about how we're supposed to have community, how we're supposed to treat each other, how we're supposed to be uplifting each generation, instead of being so damn greedy that we leave nothing behind us. And that all came from an origin that was not white, that was not, some manifest destiny of somebody who learned how to use guns before we did. So I really like where you're going with this. I really like why it's important to you. I just think they could choose, as we spoke, I think we could choose better ways of telling these stories. But the fact of the matter is, at the bottom line, it's still tough to do that, because commercially we still have to work within the structure of the economy of this country, the culture of this country, and it's tough getting that story out. It really is, unless it's disguised the way you said. Unless you look at Superman, the symbolic nature of the uniform, the icon, things like that. It's hard to get these things to our kids, which is what makes comics very important, what makes animations, doing things that are short and can apply to their shorter attention span and yet still educate. It's a big uphill climb, but I mean, the fact that you're working at it and other people are working at it is something that is so laudable and so needed that we need to replicate the kind of thing that you can do, in so many places in the country. And my hat's off to you, man.
Well, my idea is that, well, first of all, I really echo the sentiments of Huey P. Newton when he said, I don't expect the white media to create positive black male images. I just don't. So, once I let that go and said, okay, it's not their responsibility to make cool images for me. It almost is to the point where it gets on my nerves when when people do, say, a review of a movie and they're like, finally they're going to show us how they should show us. I'm like, I could care less about them showing us how they should. I want us to show us how we should be. I want us to be more savvy. They've been slicking us with this same slick stuff for a very long time. It's like, well, we could be just as slick. The stories are just, the symbology is there. It's open for us to use. One of the biggest things, for me as a designer with a designing background, was learning how to use symbols to influence people's subconscious mind on a subliminal level. All right, that's what advertising is all about. When they blast you with the commercials on TV for candy bars and for fast food and things like that, they're not really talking so much to your conscious mind. What they're really trying to do is get you to make a subconscious decision when you're at the store or when you're in front of a fast food restaurant. And so they use colors, they use images, and they use symbols to influence your mind, the way you think. That's a billion-dollar industry. They spend billions of dollars every year trying to influence your mind on a subliminal level. And they use the language that belongs to us, the language of symbology. All right? So if we learn that same language, then we can do the same type of communication. It is an uphill battle in that many of us don't know that it exists. We're at the point in our history, I believe, where there are a lot of heroes in the making. All right? Now, in every hero story, there comes a time when the hero finds out that the world is not what he thought it was. You know what? The world around me is, I've been lied to my entire life. I think that there are a lot of us that are at that point where we know that, what they've been feeding me in school, what they've been feeding me in my culture, in my community, is a lie. And everything is not what it seems. I think many of us are at that point, and we're ready to begin that hero's journey where the next step after you figure out that the world is not what it seems, then you get some aid, and somebody comes and says, you know what, you're right. You figured it out. Now you're ready for the next step. Now that you know that the world is not what it seems, you need to know that inside of you, you have some power that you have not been tapping into, and that you can if only you had the right training, if only you had the right education. We're all at that point right now. I think there's so many of us. I think there's so many young people who are not buying it anymore. They're not. I don't want to go work for somebody for the rest of my life anymore. That's nothing that is even remotely attractive to me. I would rather go jump off a building right now than go work for somebody for the rest of my life. So there's so many of us who are like, this is some BS. We have been had, and they realize that we have been had. And they're ready for the training now. They're ready for the education now. They're ready to learn who we really are on the inside. They're ready to learn these stories that belong to us and start using them for their own power. And I think we're at a great place right now. It's one of those things where, everything is kind of jumbled up and jumbled around. If you've ever poured a glass of water into a dirty bucket, and you notice that like all the dirt starts coming up from the bottom of the bucket and swirling around. But if you keep pouring that water, eventually the dirt just keeps coming out of the bucket, and the bucket starts getting clearer and clearer and clearer. I think that's where we are right now. We're kind of at the part where we're realizing that some things are going on, have gone wrong, that we've been had, and there's a lot of dirt stirred up now where everybody's like, we need to make some changes. We need to do it now, and let's get into it. And I think that things are starting to become more clear for more people because, this whole historical revolution, this whole I want to be a creator as opposed to a consumer, this whole entrepreneurial mindset, it used to not be so popular. But there are more and more people getting on board every day. More and more people like, you know what? I want to build something for myself. I want to have a legacy for my family. I want to learn about who I am and where I came from. And
well, the tools are much, much better. I mean, look at just even for publishing, printing on demand, being able to not have to worry about the big six, picking you up as an author. You can really chart your own way. The internet is a great leveler because if you come up with a very, very clever idea, people will go there without the help of Leo Burnett or any other, BBD&O or any other advertiser to funnel people to your idea. Musicians are finding that, making a direct connection with their fans through the internet and selling their music directly or giving them access to concerts and things like that. I mean, what is happening is there is an equalization or at least a slight leveling of the playing field in terms of getting your content viewed by other people. And that's huge for us. The thing that we have to fight is for the last generation, let's say starting with, about 1980, with about when Reagan was in office, there's been a concerted effort to create a very fearful populace. And starting with kids who don't believe that they're going to have a better world than their dads and their moms had, or they don't believe that they can come out of college. They know they're going to have this massive debt because education is being priced for only the wealthy. it has been a consistent effort to take away hope. And that's another thing that we should do a better job of, is trying to show people that not only is there hope that they should be clinging to, and I don't mean like, you know, the kind of hope in a political campaign, but a hope for like you said, having control of your own future. You know, not having to think about, oh, geez, I got to go make cupcakes for like 20 years and hope I don't have all of my pension taken away or something like that. But people have to help the young figure out that, you know, the world is not without hope. Yes, there are some crappy ass things going on, and yes, you know, you have a very concerted 1% of this country that wants to own, you know, 95% of the wealth and everything that goes along with this country. But you know, that can't last forever. Because the problem with that always is, and we've seen this through history for 3,000 years now, when that 1% grabs more and more and more of what people need for hope, the people who they count on to protect them have families who don't have hope. Yeah. And you know, you get too greedy, this whole thing topples over. So your process that you want to try, you know, your educational process for kids has to be a two simultaneous step process. There obviously has to be the skills and the technology to help them understand what the digital divide is and how they have to participate to overcome the deleterious effects of that digital divide. And the second part is how to maintain hope for the control of your own future. And I think that's the harder of the two parts. What do you think?
Well, I think it is, but once again, I believe that, you know, people are, once again, they're at a point in their life where they're ready to learn something new. And I think the big part about the deficit that you just pointed out is it truly lies in education. All right, there's a difference between education and training, and I learned that concept when I read the book, The Miseducation of the Negro by Carter G. Wilson. When he talked about there was a concerted effort amongst the educators of this country after slavery. They said, well, listen, we got all these free blacks who have skills. We were actually the skilled class. They have skills, and now they're going to be competing for jobs. Right. So how are we going to educate these people? Well, they came to a consensus. They said, we're not going to educate them. What we're going to do is give them training. We'll give them just enough training that they'll be good workers at our jobs. We'll give our people education. The process of education is about bringing out the best that is already inside of you. So you're basically recognizing and realizing that you have something great inside of you to begin with. By educating you, I'm going to pull that greatness out of you, all right? And for a very long time, we were actually denied that type of education in this country. And if we got it, it had to be done by our parents. It had to be done by our grandparents. And so many of us, you know, my grandfather was a sharecropper. He came up to Detroit in search of opportunities. He hadn't graduated from high school, and you know, he was a very smart man, though. He was very intelligent. He can make any machine work, all right? He wound up working at several companies, and he retired from working at Sanders as the boiler operator, and that he can make all these machines work. He can fix them. He just knew how, all right? So many of our people had these great things that they can do things like that, but they didn't have very much formal education. As a result, my grandparents, they didn't care so much about education. Now, I know some of our grandparents, great-grandparents did, but mine didn't. Mine were more the working class. They were like, as long as you get enough education that you can get a good job and support your family, then you're doing the right thing. All right? And so, consequently, I was I think I was the first person in my family to go to college. All right? For so long, we were denied a real education that says, listen, you got something great inside you. If we did get an education, it started with, you were a slave, boy. You started as a slave, and we let you go. And to this day, why I started not just teaching the digital media arts, but now I go into schools and I go into various other places, and I teach a program called Black History Before Slavery. You know why? Because they were still teaching my son in this day and age, 2013, that his history began at slavery. His teacher told me, and this was a sister, mind you, she wasn't very educated as far as knowing about her history. But young lady, she was about 25 years old, she told me at the beginning of the school year that they were going to start teaching my kids Black history. And she said, and I quote, "We're going to start at slavery and go up from there." I had to do a double take. Like, say what? You're going to start where? I'm like, you're still doing that? And so I asked her, could I do a presentation on Black history before slavery? And she agreed. And I went into the school. I did my presentation. Now, the great thing about the age that we live in is while I was talking, she was Googling everything that I said. She Googled the Olmec. She Googled the Dogon. She Googled Kemet. She was running through, researching as I was talking. At the end of my presentation, she comes up to me and says, my white Western education, I didn't learn any of that. I never learned any of that. And I didn't talk about white people. I didn't talk about Christianity or any other religion having any negative impact. That wasn't what it was about.
Sure.
Even though I could have very easily went there, but that wasn't what it was about at all. It was just about our history, our great beginnings. She said she never learned any of that. And so that began it's almost like my secret identity, if you will, because during the day I teach digital media arts. During the night I'm teaching about African heroes, gods and goddesses and mythology and archetypes and things like that. I'm more into the historical, spiritual realm about what our people were about traditionally, telling our people that you started from greatness. There's something great inside of you, and I'm going to try and pull it out of you. My superpower is to pull out the greatness that's inside of you. That's my superpower. And I'm going to get you to see it no matter what. So if you come and sit down and you want to learn about our history, you're going to get some education, and that's going to help to pull out what's inside of you already. That's going to make you a better writer. That's going to make you a better artist. That's going to make you a better husband, a better wife, better kids, because our history, there's something very healing about it. Once again, to echo the thoughts of Dr. Charles Finch, there's something healing about learning our history because it's been so long denied to us, and when we hear it, there's something inside of us, there's something in our DNA that says, yes, that is what's really going on. That is what has really happened, and there's something that almost leaps up inside of you. That's what I'm trying to activate. For young people, adults, old people, I'll go wherever they want to hear it because my goal is education.
Well, people don't, let's just take a real concrete example of the abstract you just talked about. Everybody's heard about the kinds of identity problems foster kids who have been in the foster care system since before they could remember. And so there they are, kids with no parents to point to, feeling cast adrift. Think of that in terms of an entire people's, educationally. I got really pissed. I got really upset in my high school history class when they were talking about the white man's burden of bringing civilization to all of these non-white places on Earth. And this was, man, I hate to tell you how long ago it was. This was like late 60s, early 70s. And to be taught that, to be cast adrift culturally, sociologically, by saying, as you said, well, your history started when we made your folks roll over from Africa and they arrived here, those who made it, on America's shore. That's the beginning of your history. And that is so far from the truth because let's put it this way. the ancestral history of America's blacks is older and longer than the history of any other race, creed, or color on this planet.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to get that embedded in the psyche of, whatever the 12% of us that there are in this country. I mean, that's a daunting task, but like you said, it gives people a foundation from which to build their own self-identity, and a healthy self-identity, not this crap. I mean, I invite people to look at the movie. What was the name of that? It was a documentary. It was called Outfoxed. And if I'm not mistaken, it was, of all people, what's that, Michael Moore? Was he the one who did Roger and Me and Fahrenheit 9/11?
Yeah.
He has a segment in there about how this country, the corporate media in this country, has set black folks up to be the scary criminal class of our entire culture, and has done more to damage just everyday culture in America from something that's simple by turning an entire race into the boogeyman. I talk to guys like you, and you have not descended into anger. I admit I've got anger. I'm half black, I'm half Japanese. I got issues. My dad ended up in a concentration camp in World War II. They lost all their stuff. My grandparents on my black side, they were kicked out of Oklahoma because they were actually doing better cattle business than white guys, so they accused them of being rustlers. I got issues, man, and it's, well, I'm serious. It's hard not to descend into anger. It's hard not to let that anger color how you're going to, especially how you're going to educate kids. You don't want to educate kids into saying, well, this entire country has spent its entire, life since it began the genocide of the native peoples here, making you the bad guy of everything that goes wrong in this country. And again, I laud that in you. That is such a cool thing that you don't have. Hang on a second here. You're listening to Genesis Science Fiction Radio, a service of the BlackScienceFictionSociety.com website. This is the June 21st, 2013 edition, and we're having a spirited conversation, I think, or at least I'm doing a lot of listening and learning, with Keith Young, former Detroit police officer, educator now, graphic designer, who's had quite the cool, you've had a pretty remarkable life, man. I mean, and it's admirable. So I think that what you do is so important, and replicating the educational models that you're going to be pursuing nationwide for an entire people is something I would really like to look forward to seeing happen over the next few years. And I don't know if you're looking for people to help out with that dream, but it's such a good one that a major push by getting, maybe quite a few people involved, I think would be something that would benefit not just, urban youth, black youth, but I think it would benefit our entire culture, because it would change that paradigm of how, blacks are perceived by common culture. And we only have to do it for a little time, because, whites are due to become a minority in 2043, 2045. For those of you who are going to be around then, things are going to look pretty funny. What's going to happen to white entitlement? What's going to happen to all of these things? What's going to happen with our country when we have to deal with more people on an equal level than we ever have before? I think it's going to be some interesting times, and I hope I'm around to see it.
For sure. There's a couple things. The anger thing is, like everyone, when you first find out, how bad you've been bamboozled, I mean, it is like being punched in the face, punched in the stomach. It's very angering. So, but there's something else. Our people left such a great, rich legacy for us. They also created something called the martial arts. All right. in martial arts, one of the core principles is that if you're going to fight anyone, you never fight them what? Never fight them while you're angry.
No, you don't fight them while you're angry. And
if you're angry, if you're angry, you're actually throwing away your power. You're actually giving too much energy to your enemy. You're actually clouding your thinking. And so when I learned about the Kemetic and African origins of the martial arts, and I read Sun Tzu's The Art of War, and learned how you don't fight while you're angry. You fight while you're calm. You don't fight from a position of fear, because anger is actually fear. So when you feel fear, you feel backed into a corner and you feel like I just need to come out swinging. The first thing you do is throw away a strategy. You don't have a strategy. You're just it's fight or flight. I'm just going to come out swinging and hit anything that moves. Well, as a strategist, as a tactician, as someone who understands that my history involves a man named Hannibal Barca. All right, that was a general in Carthage or Upper Africa, Northern Africa, who was never defeated by the Romans. Never. All right. As a matter of fact, to this day, they still study that black man's military moves, his military tactics, and how he was able to go into their country and whip them. All right. So I know that's my history, and I know that the art of war is inside of me. It's a part of who I am. Then I want to use those principles. So that kind of helped me to dispel that anger that I had. Like, you're not going to do a very good job fighting them while you're angry. You're not going to do a very good job educating our kids by emanating anger from yourself. Because if I'm angry while I'm teaching kids, then guess what they're going to be? Now, that anger has a place. Don't get me wrong. Fear has a place. But when you're talking about equipping someone with education and light and love, it doesn't have a place there. If I'm talking about inspiring people to greatness, then fear and anger doesn't have a place there. I had to get rid of that because my goal was ultimately to educate and give something great to these kids, just pull out what they had inside of them, that greatness, and I didn't want to taint it with my personal biases, my personal anger and angst about the things that have been done. What's been done has been done, all right? But the future right now is in our hands. And so we can do with the future what we will. Now, I can spend my time being angry about it, or I can spend my time more constructively learning how to create strategies, learning how to create tactics, learning how to fight them the way they're fighting me, by using symbols, by using images, by using colors, by using sounds, by mastering my craft and presenting that not just to my people, but when you present craftsmanship to the world, they can't help but respect it. They can't help but respect it. There's another thing I wanted to touch on, in that the stories that have been robbed from us and presented as someone else. Have you ever heard of the game called Othello?
Yes.
Othello is that game where it's black and white pieces, all right? And right now we can kind of consider the world as being mostly Europeanized. So mostly, if we were looking at an Othello board, there's mostly white pieces that have taken over a lot of the territory, because that's the game of Othello is about taking over territory. And right now there's more white pieces that have taken over various territories throughout the world. But the cool thing about Othello, when that game first came out, I was a little boy. And there was an old Chinese man that they showed on the commercial. And he was an old wise man, and he showed that the board was entirely almost white. And he said, this game takes a minute to learn, but a lifetime to master. And he flipped the entire board from being white to black. So what's happened is the people who have subjugated people of color throughout the entire world, they made a grave error. Because when they incorporated into their religion so-called pagan practices, so-called occult practices, so-called devil type of symbolism and images and things like that, and when they assimilated our stories and just recolored them, the funny thing is that they just colored the tops of it. On the inside, it's still black. And all it'll take almost is just to the right wave, the right move of the hand to flip everything back over, because the foundation was built by my ancestors. The foundation was put down so many thousands of years ago, so many millions of years ago, that we don't have to fight. We don't have to fight on that level. We're not going to win a fight with guns. We're not going to win a fight with lasers. The fight is in our mind. Once we're able to take that fight and flip it over in our minds and take the power that rightly belongs to us on the inside, it's over. The game will be over. We can stop talking. We can just go about our lives living and learning and loving like we should be, like a human race should do, not like this, craziness that we have going on here. And once again, that's an ideal. I understand. I understand it's very idyllic. But I firmly believe that, our people have that inside of them, and it's just waiting for the right spark, man. It's just waiting for the right, the right storyteller, the right, I'm waiting for our version of Star Wars. I'm waiting for our version of The Matrix. I'm waiting for our version of, all those awesome stories that, all of us can say, you know what, that was a groundbreaking movie.
I agree with you.
Those are our stories.
I agree with you. And for some reason, every week I have to point out this other example. You look back, and we'll open up to some. We've got a caller. I think back to what can we get funded. You look at and my traditional story right now is how George Lucas had to self-fund Red Tails. How you look at somebody like Spike Lee having to do guerrilla filming, marketing, borrowing money from athletes and things like that to get something done, because he can't get white people money unless he does a white people project like Inside Man. There are still financial realities that make things a little tougher for us, but like I said, with technology advancing in so many media genres, music, film, animation, publishing, the playing field for getting the works out is definitely leveling. Hang on a second. We've got somebody on the line here. Our thinking caveman. Did you want to ask a question?
Absolutely. I want to make a comment as well as point something out. For one, I'm very happy that he was able to beat the Wayne County school system into submission a little bit. Anybody in Detroit that can get something done for black people in a meaningful way deserves a standing ovation anytime, anywhere, because it's
Absolutely.
a tough club. It's a tough club. I did want to point out that in going along with the concept of understanding symbolism, symbology, and understanding that Africa as the mother continent of all human life as we know it needs to constantly be put into the limelight in gentle ways, because if it's put...
Oh no, did we lose him?
I hope not.
Hello, I'm still here.
Oh, okay. I'm just saying that, with that symbology always gently put upon folks, it becomes a little bit more obvious and capable for them to see it. You speak about Superman, and I look at After Earth. After Earth is completely an African-American project for 99% of the part, and I really took a look at that and enjoyed it more than the story of the Man of Steel, and I saw both.
Mm-hmm.
I like what you're doing. I want to see more. I want to know more.
Well, I appreciate it. I got more. there's more out there. I do have. If you're interested in more of the classes and things or the presentations that I have on the topic of Black history before slavery, various esoteric and symbology breakdowns and things like that, on my website, afroperspectives.com, I have about 30 videos that I put together over the course of a couple of years that cover various topics about, Black history, symbology, numerology, astrology, and how those things are relevant to our people. So if you're interested in that, you can take a look at my website and see what I have to offer there.
And I just pulled up afroperspectives.com, and I see that we're of a similar mind about After Earth. Thank you.
Oh, no doubt. Actually, William and I had a conversation.
I was wondering if you were going to bring that up.
On the website, Black Science Fiction Society, and it was a very good conversation. I was breaking down the symbols and archetypes that were involved in that movie, and there were so many. And I'm very proud of Will Smith and his team for doing it on that level. Now, something that William spoke on was the craftsmanship of the movie and how some of the acting wasn't quite up to par, and he would have liked to see some better actors and things like that. That's a very valid point. Once again, we're talking about now. It's one of those things where it's subjective. It's based on what you think and how you feel. So I felt it was a good movie. I felt it was very well acted. But somebody else, plenty of other people are of the opinion that it could have been better. But that's, to me, that was neither here nor there. My important point was that they actually used the Heru archetype. They actually used
they did.
The Osirian story. They actually used the story of initiation. To me, that was so much more profound. I really don't care if they would have had monkeys in monkey suits and monkey cartoons doing the whole movie. I mean, just the fact that
the actual story itself is just way miles and miles ahead of the depiction of that story as we've seen it in the last 8 opportunities.
Yeah, no doubt.
You guys are absolutely right. And in my own, not so much defense, but I was coming at it from the perspective of because of all of the wonderful things in it. And I mean, Keith, your original post, which ran down the mythos, everything, the symbolism in the whole thing was brilliant. And my perspective was, it's a damn shame that that it will not be as appreciated or as appreciated by as many people as it could be because of some of the look at the reviews that it got. It got very uneven reviews to the point where Will Smith was almost apologizing in an interview, on one of the late night shows, saying that, well, maybe my blockbuster days are over, blah, blah, blah. But that's not the point. The point is, if we're going to try to propagate those kind of ideas, and if we're going to be able to tell these stories that we own, that we created, then I want us to do it so well and so without criticism that people just shut the hell up and have to say, that was a damn good movie, those were some great ideas, I've got no complaint. And that was, I think that was more my point than anything else. I wasn't complaining about the movie. I was complaining about a weakness that I thought was preventing as many people from seeing it as should have seen it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's coming. I think that, we have to, I think it seems to me that Will Smith has been kind of easing his way into presenting these ideas, into presenting these things to a broader audience. Right. And I think he's been trying to be very careful about it because of the backlash, because of the people that are into movies, the people that know, the producers and directors. There are some very well-known people who know all of these symbols that we're talking about and use them in their movies. All right, the Superman movie was so profound because of all of the symbology in that movie. But I get the feeling he's trying to ease it on people, and I'm hoping.
Well, I mean, go back and look at 7 Pounds. Go back and look at the story of 7 Pounds, the story of atonement, the atonement to community. Oh, yeah, great story. Yeah. Great story.
Great story. So I see it coming, and I want more. I want more from Will Smith. I want more from his son. If it takes for him to get more acting lessons, if it takes for him to whatever. I see them getting better. I don't see any degradation in what they have as far as a talented family, and I see all of us as a whole. I see us getting better. I see us becoming more comfortable using these motifs in our stories. And I think that it takes that to overcome the buffoonery, the coonery, the male dress wearing, the effeminization of our black men, the masculinization and they make our women look like beasts and like, they're just mean and angry all the time. They don't like us. I see that mindset beginning to shift a bit, but we're trying to overcome a tide of garbage that they are really wanting to fund garbage. They'll throw billions of dollars at garbage, but to craft a movie on the level that Will Smith was trying to craft a movie, they don't want to support it. They don't want to give him the resources, the directors, the things that he needs. So, he has I see him working towards it, and I want to help him in that. And, I'm hoping that the next effort that he does is better. I mean, I'm always looking for better. I'm always looking for better. I'm not saying that what he did was,
Yeah, it probably will be. And what I'm hoping, against all hope, is that the perceived so-called financial failure or not so good performance of this film does not prevent him from doing more in the future. You know what I mean? Because financing this sort of thing is pretty fickle and it's difficult.
Let me add something to this, William. Before you go down that road a little bit too far. Even after the initial domestic box office, on what date is it? On Tuesday of this week, which was the 18th, a development letter went out for After Earth 2.
Okay.
So they're considering it. They're waiting to see what foreign returns are going to be like in video sales. The video sales of this movie is really going to determine it, where it goes. Now, let me be honest with you. Will Smith is an actor. I'm not for or against, but I would rather go see him than Tom Cruise do something. So I'm in the middle of the road here, but I like what the story said, so I'm going to back the story more than the actor, and therefore the production, I'm on board.
I agree, but something that I mentioned in and please don't come down on me, guys. But something that I mentioned in my post was I also don't like the notion of black guilt marketing, and that is that we must support everything that we do merely because we do it. I still think that we should also strive always to do the best that we possibly can.
Yes.
And just because somebody is darker than Harry Belafonte, we can't just automatically jump on the bandwagon and say, oh, this is good, because, I didn't want to mention this guy's name, but, look at Tyler Perry. You want to talk about somebody always, always, always going after low-hanging fruit. And, obviously the discussion about, black men emasculating themselves, jumping in dresses, and all of those things, all of that, the symbolism that is designed to bring down or at least forge a perception about a race that has been traditionally, portrayed in negative ways ever since slavery. These are the sorts of things that you have to look at in the broader context, because if you don't look at them in the broader context, not only are you going to miss some very important things, but you're going to make mistakes, I believe. And I've watched mistakes happen. The fact that Tyler Perry, what kind of numbers did he do for the Alex Cross movie? You ask that, and then almost immediately after Alex Cross, you got 2 more Medea movies coming out. So what conclusion do we draw from that? Okay, so he's going after low-hanging fruit. All right, so he wants to, he has a built-in audience that obviously is not demanding more. Are they going merely because he's a black filmmaker and these are black films? Are people going because they've been dumbed down for their expectations so sufficiently that this is the best that they can do, or they don't even give it any thought? I mean, there's some there's some very large issues that encompass this entire thing. And I didn't want to sound like I was denigrating, After Earth, but I so want these kinds of movies to succeed. I want them to succeed financially, because right now that's one of the biggest yardsticks that is used, as you said, in order to have an After Earth 2. Or anything else. I mean, just today I saw, they're going to make another Independence Day 2. They're thinking about doing that. It's 19 years after the first one, and, can they get Will Smith, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's all very fine and good, but that's not in any way a production that has any direct black mythos in it that makes it required viewing for us. You guys see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Understand. And in fact, I'll give you my thoughts on Tyler Perry after the station break at the top of the hour.
Oh, no, we're going to actually have to close this out in about 4 minutes. But what I'd like to do is, this has gone well, and people want you back, Keith. I don't think we're going to probably bring you back next week. It depends on who we can book. But I would like to know if you would like to come back, because I've had a great time discussing with you. How do you feel about that, or have you been worn out by this whole thing?
No, I would love to come back. I would absolutely love it, because there's so many things that I could share, and in particular, I was really happy to be invited to the show, because as I was stumbling upon all these different stories in my search for history, I was like, what, these will make really great science fiction stories. These will make really good fantasy stories, and I wanted to share them. I really want to start like a class or a workshop just for writers to share these archetypes. I'm actually working on a book right now, myths and archetypes for black writers, and I really want to share that with, this group of people in particular who are interested in creating science fiction and fantasy and horror books and media, because, I feel like I can really help to increase our vocabulary in that area, to give us more that we can pull from, more that we can add into our stories, and so that we can become better craftsmen at using these symbols to not just entertain, but to educate and to help lift us up from the inside, to help,
Sure.
pull us up where it counts the most. So, I would love to come back anytime you want to have me.
All right, well, that's definitely something that's going to happen for all these people who are screaming and hollering and saying, bring him back. We will bring Keith back. And one of the things, if somebody can go out and do that, my hands are kind of busy right now. If somebody can go ahead and, for all of you who are listening now, and those of you who pick this up as a podcast, something that I recommend is to go and see Keith Young's post at blacksciencefictionsociety.com on the importance of After Earth, and take a look at that, and definitely read about the mythos, because for people who create worlds, for people who are going to create content and want to create comics, novels, even movies, you have to have a consistent mythos. You have to have a well-crafted universe, and being able to use the symbolism that we invented, thousands of years ago, seems like a pretty laudable idea and a good starting point for the basis for doing that. And so we're just about out of time. I want to ask our good administrator, Jarvis, to drop in his last words here, and go ahead, Jarvis.
Hey, man, I just want to always, I need to record this. I want to always thank everyone for participating on the show, for being a member of the site, and to also get active on the site, post your pictures, post events that you may know about that we may not know about, and interact with your other members on the site, and also tell everyone you know about the radio show. It's every Friday with Brother William on the mic. And just thank you for participating and supporting us in what we're trying to do.
And be sure to tell your friends, people who have missed out on the shows, they are available very shortly after the day, and they're posted up on TalkShoe, and there are links also at BSFS, so that people who have missed a great show can get it. Let them know about that. Let them know we're going to be here every Friday. And I want to wish everybody a good evening. And Keith, I really want to thank you for spending the time, man. This has been great. And I look forward to the next time you stop by.
Well, once again, I thank you very much for having me. It's been my honor to share. And, I'm looking forward to coming back.
Well, good. We will have you back, and we'll announce it up. Eventually, we'll get to the point where we can get a whole month's worth of future shows up on the website and the events calendar. And for everybody who helps put this together and everybody who helps make my job easier, I want to thank all of you people. And we will see you all next Friday. Have a good evening, everybody.